This presentation is TaxSlayer Online Enhancements for tax year 2024. For several years, TaxSlayer Online has provided a suggestion box that enables Tax-Aide volunteers to request software enhancements. Each year, TaxSlayer officials, along with software engineers, prioritize the massive list and implement as many top priority suggestions as time allows. Fortunately, for tax year 2024, Congress did not enact significant tax law changes, so TSO engineers were able to implement many of our requests. I will now go over those with you. I will go through a list of the tax year 2024 TSO enhancements very briefly, and then I'll get into more detail in future slides. So starting with three significant client search screen enhancements, which we'll get into individually, each of the three. Streamlined data entry for various date fields. So entering dates into TaxSlayer has in the past been more cumbersome than it needed to be, and so we'll see what enhancements have been done there. Prior year comparison on the summary page, which was in the past the comparison between the current year and the prior year, is now the comparison of the current year and two prior years. The TSO Simplified Method worksheet now pulls taxpayer and spouse ages automatically from the tax return and works a lot more like the Bogart tool has worked for us in the past. The 2024 version of TSO, TaxSlayer Online, has a new comparison worksheet for MFJ versus MFS. So to help us determine, or to help the taxpayer actually determine which is a better filing status for them to use, which will provide a bigger refund, we can take a look at both filing statuses and essentially tell them which would be the more beneficial for them. There's also a new federal estimated tax voucher worksheet, so that we have a worksheet to help us determine what the amount of the quarterly vouchers should be for next tax year. So oftentimes we have taxpayers that come in that have been paying quarterly payments in the past, and it's nice to have a worksheet so that if there are any upcoming changes in the following year, such as additional income that they didn't have in the current year, or maybe a deduction that they're losing in the upcoming year, we can make a more accurate determination for voucher amounts. Also, there is an enhancement done now to the summary print screen PDF that comes up on the screen, and we'll get into the details of that as well. Here we have a look at the client search screen, and what's different about the screen now is that the Social Security number is now clickable, whereas in the past the only way that you could select somebody from this list would be to use the select button on the right hand side. Unfortunately, because we use laptops and some people have to increase the size of their font, sometimes the select button doesn't actually show up on the screen on a laptop. So the request was made to activate being able to click on something else, so that the select button was not the only way that we could select somebody from the list. So big improvement for the people using laptops, which is just about all of us. With this set of enhancements, we are now able to sort our client search screen, either by Social Security number, first name, last name, phone number, however we want to sort it. At the top of each field, we see up and down arrows, so that if that symbol, up and down arrow symbol, is clicked on, the sort will change to either low to high, high to low, A to Z, or Z to A, depending on whether it's an alpha field or a numeric field. So that's a nice feature. These lists, as the season progresses, get longer and longer, and being able to sort, it certainly cuts the amount of time that it's going to take us to find a particular client. So nice feature for this. And also you'll notice that the customer portal button is now there that wasn't there before. The customer portal button gives us the ability to look at a list of strictly the taxpayers that we deal with that are on the customer portal. So they have created their own customer portal accounts. They have the ability, these taxpayers have the ability to upload W-2s and 1099s so that we as preparers can access those documents and do their tax returns for them. So this works particularly well for friends and family. Oftentimes we're doing tax returns for friends and family that may be in different parts of the country, and so access to the documents is made very easy through this customer portal. So I highly recommend that if you haven't tried it, you maybe try it on yourself first. Treat yourself as a taxpayer, and actually create an account for yourself on the customer portal. Upload some documents, and then access them as if you were the preparer. And that way, when and if you do deal with an actual taxpayer, you'll know how to handle it. So it's a nice feature, and I like what they've done to the client search screen in general. So the next thing that we have is the enhancement to the date field in TaxSlayer. Most of the date fields within TaxSlayer have been modified. Last I checked, there were still some that had not been modified, but I assume they will be by the time the actual tax season begins. So what's happened here is that in the past, we've had this old method of entering the date where we had to click on each field. So the MM field, you'd have to click on, and then you'd have to click on the DD field and the YYYY field. And also in the past, you really couldn't enter, like for January, for instance, you couldn't enter a 01. You had to enter the 1 all by itself. And the same thing with the day. You had, if it was less than 10, you'd have to enter a number 8 or a 9 or whatever, but without the leading 0. So it was inconsistent with the way dates are normally handled in other software products. So they've made it more consistent now, so that when you go to a date field, for the most part, you just enter all 8 characters. Like on the slide, you can see 09211943. You can enter all of that in one, without even looking, actually, because the slashes are added automatically. So if you know what the date is, you know it's 9/21, you just enter 09211943, hit enter, you're done. Or hit tab, actually. In TaxSlayer, most of the time, you would hit the tab key to go to the next field. So that's essentially it. Big improvement. The date fields were really cumbersome for a lot of people because most of us are really accustomed to using the date format that they now are using in TaxSlayer, but I don't know who came up with the old method, but the new one's much better. So let's assume that you've just finished a particular tax return. Now you want to kind of do a sanity check to see if this whole thing makes sense. So you click on the 3-year comparison. Last year was a 2-year comparison. And last year it showed very rudimentary data, just very simple things, but it was useful because if there was a noticeable difference between the prior year and the current year, then you had the opportunity to ask the taxpayer question, why is this the way it is? Why is it different than last year? And you can oftentimes discover that either there was a mistake in the data entry that you did or whatever, but without the comparison, you really had no way to know. You didn't have any quick way to compare it to last year's tax return, short of actually pulling last year's tax return out of the envelope and looking at the paper return. So the electronic version is a lot faster, And now we have a 3-year comparison, so we can look at the current year and compare it to the prior 2 years. And we no longer had just rudimentary data. We have lots of data now to look at. So it gets down to a much lower level of granularity in this new comparison than the old. Previously, we had no printout available for this worksheet. Now we do. So this is something new as well. We can actually print it out. That's enough said about that. Let me just show you the comparison in the next screen. So in TaxSlayer, you would go to the summary print screen, and it would come up with a screen that looks like this. And you will see in the upper right the word prior year comparison. Now, many of you may not even realize that that was there last year because it's not something that really stands out. It's in pretty small type, and if you're not curious and go snooping around, you probably wouldn't even realize that that was there before. But the comparison to the prior year and now with the year even before that is very important to do an accurate tax return, because you want to see whether there are differences from the prior year especially. But then if you do see differences in the prior year, you now have an opportunity to even look back further just to see what might be going on. So this is the way that you would get to the prior year comparison, by clicking on that button in the upper right. So we'll move on to the next slide. Here is an example of the prior year comparison worksheet, and you can see various things here. For instance, you can see that you can eventually print this worksheet out once it's all finished. You can print it out for the benefit of the taxpayer. And one thing I wanted to point out, however, is you can also see that the first 2 columns for 22 and 23 have no data in them, and that is because I generated this from the practice lab. And in practice lab, when you do a practice tax return, and even if you've done that same tax return in the prior year, none of that information comes forward to the current year. It's not like the version of TaxSlayer that we actually use during the tax season. That information comes forward assuming the taxpayer had their tax return done at the same site that they're coming to this year. That information will come forward and will fill these other columns. So I just wanted to show an example of what the spreadsheet, what the worksheet looks like, and what kind of functionality it has. So this is only the beginning of it. It's a rather lengthy worksheet, so you will see the following few screens are going to be the remainder of the comparison. This is slide 2 of 6. Slide 3 of 6. Slide 4 of 6. Slide 5 of 6. So here is the end of the comparison worksheet. So you can see here that there is a lot of opportunity to compare the current year to the prior 2 years, and a lot of opportunity to see where things may be very different from the prior year, and to create some inquisity, some questions that may come to mind as to why is this, and get answers to those questions, and an opportunity to alleviate the chance that there may have been a mistake made somewhere, or that the taxpayer didn't provide all the documents that they had. So it's a nice feature. It's rather lengthy. Maybe they're going to do something about that in the future, but it's much better than what we had, and I think it's a good thing. So good luck. Make sure you use it. I think I've been using these comparison worksheets, I've been using for years and years, and I can't live without them. So please use them. So now we have an enhanced simplified method worksheet in TaxSlayer Online. Previously, the tax preparer would either need to manually calculate the taxpayer's and often the spouse's age at the time of the taxpayer taking their first pension payment, or the preparer would access the Bogart Simplified Method Calculator to automate the process. Now, TaxSlayer Online Simplified Method Calculator automatically determines the age or the combined ages and calculates the taxable amount in box 2A of Form 1099-R. The Bogart calculator, however, still provides an additional advantage of providing a printout of the taxable amounts for the life of the pension annuity. So if the taxpayer wants a printout and wants to know exactly how much they're going to be taxed on each and every year up until the end of the pension being paid out, the Bogart calculator is still good for that. But primarily most of everything we do is done within TaxSlayer, and it's certainly a time saver not to have to get out of TaxSlayer and go to some other tool. So I highly recommend doing it this way unless the taxpayer is looking for a printout. So here's a look at the simplified method worksheet within TaxSlayer. You get here by clicking on the text in the 1099-R beneath box 2A. You will see click here for options. You click on the red text, click here for options to get to this simplified method worksheet. So here we are going to determine the taxable amount of the amount that appears in box 1 of the 1099-R, and to do that we need to provide some information. So that's what the worksheet's all about. So it pulled over the gross distribution amount from box 1, $13,633, and then we have to enter the planned cost at annuity start date. That planned cost is the amount that the annuitant contributed themselves during their working life toward that pension. So it should not, that amount is never going to be taxed again. There is no double taxation in the system. So we enter 5,864, which came from box 1099-R box 9B, as in Brian. And then we enter the starting date of the annuity, which is January 1st, 2010. And notice the format for the date has not been changed, so it's the old format where you have to click between each box in order to put the date in. And then we would enter death benefit exclusion if there is one. So if there was one on the 1099-R, we would include that here. And then there is a checkbox which says click here if the annuity benefits are based on the life of the annuitant and a beneficiary. So we call that a joint survivor annuity. And in this case, it was a joint survivor annuity, so the ages are added together. And so TaxSlayer automated the process by finding what the ages would have been on the date that the annuity started being paid out. So keep in mind, these are not the dates, these are not the ages for that particular tax year. It is the ages that these people were at when the annuity was paid out, that month the annuity was paid out. So what happens after you enter all of that information, the worksheet automatically calculates the taxable amount and places it in box 2A of the 1099-R. And then if there's any need to change it, you can go back to where originally you said click here for options, and it will then say click here to make changes. So that's basically it. The Bogart calculator is still useful, as I mentioned in the last slide, for printing out a schedule of the payments for the remaining life of the annuity, including the last payment, which is usually different than the rest of the payments. So that's useful for some taxpayers, but This is easier if you don't have to leave TaxSlayer and go to some other tool and then return. It's quicker to be able to stay in here and get the job done using TaxSlayer. So that's basically it on the simplified method worksheet and how it works these days. And I think it's a big improvement. So now in TaxSlayer Online we have a comparison worksheet for the married filing jointly, married filing separate scenarios. So we can now compare which is more advantageous to the taxpayer, the MFJ or the MFS. And the way that you get to it is you can see on the left-hand side of the screen under Federal section of the tax return, you will select miscellaneous forms and you'll see this menu of miscellaneous forms that appear, and all the way at the bottom of that menu is the MFJ MFS comparison worksheet. The first thing that you need to do is you need to answer this one question. Did the spouse live with the taxpayer at any time during the year? Here is a view of the beginning of the MFJ MFS worksheet. This worksheet is quite involved, and actually in my slide presentation you're going to see 4 separate slides, so I couldn't possibly get all of this worksheet onto one slide. So this is the first of 4 slides. A couple of assumptions that are made here is that you would have, we've assumed that you've already created a joint return for this taxpayer. And then the worksheet is going to split up that joint return and is going to show you the difference between filing jointly and filing separately. The other assumption is that when you created the return, you labeled all of the entries, whether they be either taxpayer or spouse. For instance, when you entered W-2s or 1099s, there's a spot in TaxSlayer where you check off whether it's a taxpayer's W-2 or a spouse's W-2. So assuming you did all of those correctly, this worksheet should be very helpful to you and helpful to the taxpayer to determine which is the more advantageous way to file. So we'll now move to show you the rest of it. You can see that the TaxSlayer does take the joint information and then split it up into the taxpayer and spouse separately, and so you can see which is more advantageous. At the end of this thing, you'll see what the refund would be for the joint as opposed to either the taxpayer or the spouse. Here's the second slide of MFJ MFS worksheet, and you can see how the data has been filled in automatically. So TaxSlayer looks at that joint return and sorts out the information, puts it where it belongs in the worksheet. Here you can see on this third slide that the taxable income for the joint, for them as a couple, is 0. The taxable income for the spouse is also 0, but for the taxpayer, if they were to file just the taxpayer alone, it would be $7,991 of taxable income. So we'll move on to the last slide of the set. So this is the final result of the MFJ MFS worksheet for this particular example. You can see that the refund for the joint couple is $3,124. However, if they file separately, the taxpayer would have a refund of $2,826, and the spouse would owe nothing, or would have to pay, would not get a refund, or would owe nothing. So you can see that the advantage here is the joint filing status, that they're going to get the largest refund by filing jointly. Once the comparison is finished, you can see here on the miscellaneous forms screen that there is now a print symbol under MFJ MFS comparison. It does not appear in yellow in TaxSlayer. That is, I highlighted it myself, so don't expect to see it in yellow. So that's the ability to print the comparison sheet. Now we will talk about the estimated tax voucher calculator. And you can see on this slide here that on the left-hand side under Federal section, you will select Payments and Estimates. And within that menu, you will select Vouchers for 2025 Estimated Tax Payments in order to get to the calculator. You then have two choices on this screen. One is for the printing your vouchers for 2025 estimated tax payments, or the second selection is the 1040 estimated payments calculator. So you're going to select the calculator. So here is the beginning of the calculator. Here again, very much like the MFJ MFS worksheet, there are a number of slides here to cover this estimated tax calculator because it has a lot of different fields, so it's a rather lengthy screen. I couldn't possibly get it all in one slide. So the following 4 slides after this are going to be also part of the calculator screen. So you can see here that TaxSlayer essentially pulls the information from the current year and will then assume that the following year is going to be a similar situation. So the beauty of the calculator is that you as a tax preparer can go into the 2025 column and change any of those criteria to be something anticipating some sort of a change. So let me give you an example. I have a client who had a rather large business loan, so we did a Schedule C for them, and they had a rather large deduction, which was a very significant tax advantage, that they were paying interest on this very large business loan. So those interest deductions every year were quite an advantage to them. But what happened was they went and paid off that loan and actually got a loan from a family member to make up the difference. And they no longer had that tax deduction for the following year, but I was never told about this. So as it turns out, the estimated payments that they had made to try to cover their their following year taxes were not anywhere close to what they should have been because that deduction had gone away. So this estimator, this calculator is very useful for doing things like, okay, we know this about this year, but next year something's going to be different. Either the income is going to be different or the number of deductions is going to be different. The extent of a particular deduction is going to be much less. So you can make all of the adjustments in the right-hand column, and then the TaxSlayer will then tell you what the estimated tax vouchers should be as opposed to what they have been in the past. So we've never had this available to us in the past. It's brand new, and it should be very, very useful to figuring out how much somebody should pay on a quarterly basis for the upcoming tax year. Here is screen 2 of the estimated tax calculator. Not much to say about this. So we'll get on to screens 3 and 4. There's another screen of more information in that calculator. As you can see, there's a lot going on in this calculator, but it's going to pull most of what you need from the current year tax return. So this is something you would do when you have the current year tax return finished and you just want to estimate how much they're going to have to pay in estimated taxes for next year. So you can make any changes for next year on the right-hand column. One more screen. And this is the last screen of the estimated tax calculator. Once you get to this point, you will determine what the next year's tax liability will be compared to this year, and then you can figure out how much on a quarterly basis needs to be sent in. Just like we've talked about with the other calculators, you can see here that you can print out the calculator once you're finished making the determination about the quarterly payments. So there's the print feature right here. So we have a couple of improvements to the summary print screen. Now this is the screen that you see when you on the summary page when you click on View Print Return, it prints a summary of the taxpayer's tax return. So this is the summary screen, the PDF file that you would see at that point. The difference on this particular slide is that we now have the bank information. So assuming somebody has a direct deposit or a direct debit, the bank information, the routing number and the account number now show up on the summary screen. Previously they did not. So that's one of the improvements, and then on the next screen we'll get into the other one. So the other improvement to the summary page is that the income form summary, which would have your 1099s and your W-2s, previously did not have the tax ID number, also known as the EIN, employer ID number. They did not list those numbers on the summary page. They were listed on the quality review print set, so the quality reviewers were seeing the employer ID numbers, but the preparers, when they looked at the summary of the return, were not seeing them. So now they appear in both places. So that's it for the enhancements to the summary page. Thanks for watching.